Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. This is the 290th episode of the podcast, and if my math serves me correctly, that means we're only 10 away from 300. And that's something. I don't know what it is, but it's something. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Today, we have a lot of things to get to, because every 10 episodes, I have a podcast episode where I interact with questions, comments, and occasional accusations from the listener, like you, and readers of the podcast, of the website, of course. So I'm just going to dive right into it because there's a whole bunch. I usually try to do 3, but a couple of these have multiple components to them, so it's going to take a few minutes. But let's get into the first one. The first one is from Quinn, and I'll get right to Quinn's email. Matthew, I know you get this all the time, so I guess I'll echo everyone else by saying thanks so much for your podcast and website. Hey, thank you, Quinn. I look forward to Thursday nights when you drop a new episode. I have a couple of questions for you, hoping you know the answers to. Number 1, I've been trying not to pack so much when I hit the river. Sometimes my gear gets in the way, and I think it's doing more harm than good. I wanted your opinion on lanyards. Have you used one, or do you use one at all? I've seen a few people use them, and I think it would be a great idea, but wanted your opinion on them. Number 2, saltwater fly rods. What's the difference between those and freshwater? I mean, if you took an 8-weight saltwater rod and an 8-weight freshwater rod, how much difference would you notice? Aren't they made out of the same material? Thanks again for everything, Quinn. Quinn, 2 very good questions, very different questions, but very good questions. I'll try to answer them both. So the first one regarding lanyards is, yes, I've used lanyards. When I've used lanyards, this is generally what I've done. I have used them if I'm going to be fishing on mountain streams or if I'm walking the banks of a pond, and so I'm not going to be getting very deep. And then I won't use them around my neck like they are designed. I will loop them through a couple of my belt loops. And so they effectively hang down on my hip on my left-hand side because I'm a right-handed caster. So I effectively have a little string with nippers, forceps, floatant, and a fly box dangling kind of just off to the side of my pocket. And so that's how I've used it in that situation. I've also used a lanyard a little bit in the traditional sense, so over my neck and into my waders. Now, one of the things that I like about lanyards is, like you mentioned, the minimalism that they promote. It's nice to not have to carry a bunch, and then when what you do carry is easily accessible. So I did this a lot when I was fishing particular hatches where I knew I didn't need a lot of flies. I knew I didn't need a lot of gear. I knew exactly what I wanted to have. So I would have a little fly box with like 5 patterns of the exact same fly because it was a particular hatch going on. I knew that's what I was going to be fishing for the hour and a half, 2 hours I was going to be out in the water. And then just the requisite tools that I was going to have. But one thing that I think is really important if you do use a lanyard, especially if you move around, or if you are going to have a bunch of mending and things like that where lines are moving around, is have one that has a clip on it or attach a clip to it, just a simple alligator clip, something where you can clip that lanyard to the front of your waders or to the front of your shirt. So when you move around or when you bend over, it doesn't fall down in front of you. That was one of the things that bothered me the most about it. But then also, like I said, if you're mending line, if you're double hauling, things like that, you want something that has a bunch of, spots where you could get tangles. You want that as close to your person as possible. So that's one of the reasons I'm not a huge chest pack fan anymore. And I usually don't even use vests as much as I used to. It's because I like having a nice clean front. And so a lanyard gives you that, especially if it's a lanyard that you can kind of tuck into your vest. And if that's the case, then I would say go for it. But try it out. They're usually inexpensive, and really, I don't want to, take business away from any of the companies that make lanyards. If you have a length of paracord and a couple of other things that you could get at a hardware store and a knowledge of how to tie knots, then you can make yourself exactly what you need and the exact size you need, and it's going to do way better than anything you can buy for, $35-40. So that is my 2 cents on the lanyard question. Now, the other question, saltwater fly rods. I might have addressed this recently in a podcast, but just to go over it again, potentially there's no difference. So I have seen fly rods series where you have the hardware and then the cosmetics change as you go from the freshwater to the saltwater. So the freshwater is like a burgundy blank, and the saltwater is like a navy blank, but it's the same blank. Now, obviously, the taper is going to change based upon the weight designation of that rod. So an 8 weight is going to be different than a 5 weight, but two 8 weights, one is designated freshwater and one is designated saltwater, and they're of the same line and series, there's a good chance it is the same rod, just different colors, if that is the case, and then different components. Now, this itself might be sufficient. One, you're going to be getting a fighting butt probably. I remember back in the day when I was selling rods, we had two 6 weights. And the only difference between the freshwater and the saltwater was that the saltwater had a fighting butt and it had a much larger first guide, that stripping guide, to accommodate much more kind of dynamic casting. And then it was just the hardware for the reel seat, which, at the end of the day, if you use a wood nickel reel seat as opposed to an anodized aluminum one, it's not going to change the performance of it. It's going to require a little bit more maintenance, and I'd take more care of it. But at the end of the day, it's not going to matter that much. And the same is true of the guides. So really, you're paying for the benefit of reduced necessity of maintenance, although I maintain all of my saltwater fly rods, regardless of if they have high-end components on them or not. But the other thing I would say is that if you have a fly rod manufacturer that has kind of parallel series with one another, as opposed to the same series, they have a line of fly rods that is built for freshwater, and it includes like a 7 and an 8 weight. And then you have a line of rods as for saltwater, and it starts at 7 and 8 weight and goes up from there. Then there's a very good chance that although the materials may be the same, the build of those two rods might be different. Now, it's hard to make a general statement like that without looking at a particular series of rods or a line of rods made by a manufacturer. But generally speaking, those saltwater rods are going to be a little bit faster, so the taper will be different to accommodate for that. So you very well may have a rod maker that has two different fly rods from two different series that are the same weight designation, but because one is built for saltwater and one is built for freshwater, the tapers may be significantly different to provide maybe a fast action for the salt and a medium fast for the fresh. But again, it's hard to say without knowing specifics. But that's a really good question, and like I return to what I mentioned a couple weeks ago, which is if you have that 6, 7, 8 weight that you use for bass, that you use for salmon, that you use for pike or muskie, even maybe a 9 or 10 weight, and you want to give saltwater fly fishing a shot and you can cast well with it, by all means do it. Clean the thing off, but if you buy a rod for the salt, clean that thing off too. So hopefully that information is helpful to you, Quinn, and everyone else who is listening today. All right, next question is from Bruce. Bruce says, "Hi, Matthew. Really enjoying your podcast. I'm up to episode 78 and in the COVID era." Remember that? Remember COVID era? Masks and lockdowns and all that? Yeah, we made it, didn't we? Anyway, so that is what Bruce is listening to right now, is podcasts from back then when things were very different. Well, things are relatively normal now. And he says, "I have a question about fishing small mountain streams. I'm heading to Wyoming in about 10 days. This has already happened when I'm recording this. Well, in about 10 days, and hope to fish some of my favorite small streams, weather and road conditions permitting. I normally fish up there in late July when terrestrials are the flies to fish. What dry flies, if any, would you recommend for mid to late May? Very much appreciate your advice. Best regards, Bruce." Well, I respond to Bruce, so hopefully he's caught fish already or is in the process of catching fish right now. As I'm saying this, I think this would be a fantastic podcast episode itself, because what I shared with Bruce is effectively my dry fly fishing strategy when I go to small mountain streams. And this is true in when I fish in the Rocky Mountains. I've never fished in Wyoming, but I fished out west and here on the East Coast, everywhere I've fished on small mountain streams. So it's kind of my go-to method. And like I said, I'll probably expand on this sometime in the future. But it starts with a humpy or a fly like a humpy. So royal wolf if you're feeling crazy. Maybe an Ausable wolf if you like trimming lots of little deer hair. But I like going with a humpy. I like going with a yellow humpy. For whatever reason, it just makes me happy. So I start with that. And why is that? Well, It is a mayfly looking bug, but it's also chunky and it floats well. So it's not the biggest attractor pattern, but it's also not a delicate mayfly. It strikes a nice balance between the two. And then what I will pay attention to is, what are the fish doing? Because if they're in the mood for dry flies, they are going to give it some kind of attention here or there. You might only be getting very hesitant strikes, or you might be getting very aggressive strikes. I've had days where every fish in the pool seems to want that little humpy. And if that happens, then I jump up to a stimulator, maybe something a little bit bigger. So I'm just thinking about my New Hampshire mountain streams I fish. Usually start with like that 14 uh, um, yellow humpy, and then if I'm catching every fish in that pool, including all those little 3 and 4 inch trout that I really don't want to be, messing up their face, then I will switch to like a size 12 stimulator. And now, because I know the bite is on and the fish are ready to play ball, I will use something bigger and I will discourage some of those smaller fish from fighting, messing up those pools, and I can focus on those larger fish. But if the opposite is true, if fish are being very reluctant to strike, if they're being resistant to go after that humpy, if maybe I'm spooking fish, then I'll drop down to a parachute Adams. So that parachute Adams would probably work for all those fish, but it's also going to attract all of those dace and chub and fall fish and bait fish and teeny tiny trout. So I only will bust that out if the fish are being really, really finicky and they are being wary. Maybe they've been fished over recently. Maybe it's just that the sun is high and the water's low. But that's generally speaking my kind of modus operandi when I go to fish a small mountain stream, particularly when it comes to dry flies, as Bruce asked. So those are my three go-tos: parachute Adams, yellow humpy, and an orange stimulator. But again, the color of the stimulator doesn't matter, and to be honest with you, the color of the Adams doesn't matter. Those purple Adams, I really like those too. I think those are kind of fun. But those are my three dry flies I start with, and then like he mentioned, terrestrials. But again, earlier in the season, that's not going to be as sure of a thing. But like I said, that kind of brief thumbnail sketch of the way I approach a mountain stream with those three flies, that, in my opinion, it kind of cuts out the caddis. But the thing about the humpy is it really has a generic silhouette. It is a little bit caddisy, although from a construction standpoint, it's a mayfly construction, right? Tail, body, wings, hackle. But it's chunky enough that it can pass for a caddisfly, and certainly a small stimulator can as well. But a stimulator also has a stonefly profile, and I am not one of those people that says, "Well, there's black stoneflies out here. We need to get a black dry fly." You get a big chunky stimulator, and the tips of that thing's deer hair are jutting into the water up against a silhouette as a silhouette of the sun. I think you're going to be totally fine. Actually, I know you'll be totally fine because I've caught plenty of fish on bugs like that when black bugs are floating around the water. So those would be my suggestions for you, Bruce. Of course, I talked to a local fly shop. One of the things I really appreciate about other podcasts, especially someone like Tom Rosenbauer's podcast, people ask questions about what fly should I use in this place at this time, and he says talk to the local fly shop, and I would say the same thing. For some reason, maybe a humpy doesn't work up in Wyoming, but I tend to think it does because it's probably one of the best flies ever designed for catching small mountain fish, small stream mountain fish. Big fish in small mountain streams. How about that? So, Bruce, thank you very much for getting in touch and for asking that question. Like I said, I hope you caught lots of big trout. All right. Third and final, I guess, question for today's episode. This comes from Jeff. So Jeff says, many thanks for the podcast and website. They're invaluable resources. Guys, you're making me blush. Right. A quick comment for fly fishing accusations. Ooh, see? Here we go. The ubiquitous parenthetical comment that brook trout are actually char has become a minor obsession of mine. Once you see it everywhere. I believe that it even occurs in the book of Job, where we are informed that Leviathan is actually a char, not a trout, but I may be misremembering that. As a pastor, you are misremembering it. At the same time, there's a lot of speculation about that too, so there's a lot of parallels, but I think that was tongue-in-cheek. He goes on to say, brown trout and Atlantic salmon belong to the same genus, but no one ever comments that brown trout are actually salmon. Rainbow trout, cutthroat trout, and every species of Pacific salmon belong to the same genus, but no one ever comments that rainbow trout are actually salmon. Yet every article, book, video, and podcast mentions that brook trout are actually char. There's likely a simple explanation for this, but I prefer to imagine a complex and sinister conspiracy. God bless, Jeff, a novice char or trout or salmon fisherman. Well, Jeff, I definitely chuckled when I read your email, and I think it is spot on, pointing out kind of an eccentricity of the angling community. It's one of those things where that's a fact that pretty much everyone knows. At least you assume everyone know that a brook trout is actually not a trout, but a char from a scientific taxonomical standpoint. It's surprising how few people know that. I mean, this goes back to just the relative ignorance that we have, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. Just calling a spade, right? About kind of what trout are. Like, we love them, we know how to catch them, and we maybe even know how to eat them. But knowing what they are and where they're from. Recently, I saw somebody who should know better. This was on a major brand, as mid-major brand website. Someone talking about how they, this rod would be a great thing to be chasing those native brookies and browns in the Shenandoahs. I thought, my heavens, how did this person get past proofreading? There's no native brown trout in the Shenandoahs. There's no native brown trout on this entire continent. And that just again shows there's a little bit of ignorance and naivety about this issue. But people will find out that brook trout aren't trout; they're char, and then they go wild on that, and call them char, call them brook char, pond char, you name it. And it really doesn't add anything to the conversation, because it's more of like a factoid rather than an appreciation for actually what's happening from a genetic and again taxonomical standpoint. But you bring up a good point. People, we really hone in on the brook trout and their classification, but we don't know as much about the similarities between maybe cutthroats and rainbows, and Pacific salmon, and then the same thing with brown trout and Atlantic salmon. And that would maybe be, I'm using these podcasts to seed future episodes, but perhaps that would be a really good conversation to have. It required a little more prep than usual, probably required more notes than usual, which is saying something. Actually, it's saying a lot. But I think that would be a good thing to talk about, because the more we know about issues like this, it doesn't necessarily mean that we will catch more fish. And I know for some people, that is the end all be all of gathering information when it comes to fly fishing media, social media, podcasts, websites, things like that. How can I catch more fish? But it's a very accessible and easy to process and easy to digest and easy to be able to articulate concept. What is the difference between brown, rainbows, and brookies? Who are they most closely related to? Maybe who they can interbreed with. What about some of these other species that are also in the salmonid family? Where do they fit in? It's a really good thing that I think is worth talking about. So I do think that you're not off base saying this is probably a complex and sinister conspiracy. What are they trying to hide by taking our minds off of other things and making us focus on char? I don't know, but I'll look into it for you, Jeff. All right. Well, 3 great emails. I mean, some of the ones that were on the proverbial cutting room floor were fantastic too. And I will. I got back to you all, and for some reason, if the emails dry up in the next 10 weeks, then maybe I'll just drop back into those. But I anticipate I'll be getting more interaction then, and so we'll deal with those as they come. But thank you everyone who emails. Again, like I said, I do try to get back to you as soon as possible, and I really enjoy it. It's one of my favorite parts of Casting Across is interacting with people. So keep those emails coming, Matthew@castingacross.com. You can always direct message me on any of the social media platforms, although I do not spend as much time on those these days, but I still get chirps, little red dots when people reach out, and so I'm happy to interact with you on that also in more of a real time manner if you happen to catch me while I'm close to those buttons. So Anyway, this week on castingacross.com, 2 articles as per usual, and they are as follows. The first is 3 thoughts for the season. So this is a Memorial Day article. So generally speaking, on holidays, I don't put out too much content because people are off doing other stuff. So I put out a little brief something, also commenting on how Memorial Day, on one hand, is the unofficial start of the summer, but on the other hand, is so much more than that. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that, not on Memorial Day only, but as we think about why we can do all the things that we do in this country. So the 3 things I talked about, though, is revel in the simple. So enjoy the small stuff. I'm getting ready to go on a big trip here in a few days to catch, hopefully, Lord willing, some big, fun trout. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't rejoice in the sunfish I was chasing a couple days ago. They're both good in their own way. Roll with the punches, which is thinking about if you can't go on that big trip, then that's okay. Enjoy the small trip. Enjoy the trip around the corner. Enjoy again, kind of the simple things. And then thirdly, resting well, which is something that we don't do great as a culture. We have this weird thing where we really, really want a 2-day weekend that we can kind of work hard at things that are not vocational. But rest is necessary. We were created to rest. So anyway, that was Monday. Wednesday, necessary redundant gear. Now you might say, haven't you been writing a lot about stuff like this lately? And I would say, yes, I have. I've been thinking about what kind of gear is worth having 2 of, and if you have 2 of it, what kind of gear is worth having that second item on your person or in the car or just having it home, backing up. So a podcast was about this last week. An article about line was about this last week. But here I talk about a few items that I think are really a great idea to have on hand. Maybe a slight variation of the item that you normally are fishing with. Have that on your person. I'll just straight up give you the thing I think is most important. Second pair of sunglasses. Right. Sunglasses keep flies out of your eyes, both the ones that you're fishing with and the ones that you're imitating. 2, the polarization matters. And so consequently, you need a pair of sunglasses that will do you well first thing in the morning when it gets wicked overcast and at the end of the day when it gets darker, because you're going to want to pop up those gray or blue or even amber lenses as the sun is coming up and as it is going down. You're going to want to just slide them down your nose or put them on your hat, but then you lose the benefits of the protection and you lose the benefits of the polarization. So get yourself a pair of yellow lenses. There's even lighter lenses out there, but the problem with those is that they offer zero protection when there's any sort of sunlight. But I like my yellow sunrise silver mirror lenses from Costa that are good. And so I have those in my pack, and I use them when the clouds come out and it gets really dark, and then first thing in the morning and last thing at night. But I touched on, I think, 3 or 4 other things in that. 3 other things in that article, necessary redundant gear, that came out this Wednesday over at castingacross.com. This week's recommendation is to make sure you read Wednesday's article. I have a giveaway coming up. I haven't done a giveaway in a long time. So if you at all are interested in getting something for free, then be reading castingacross.com. You know what? Even if you're not interested in getting something for free, you should be reading castingacross.com. But in particular, if you want to win something, then listen to the podcast, which is what you're doing already, and read Wednesday's article. And like I said, you'll have a chance to get something for free. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast on iTunes. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.